Wells of Silence by TheBeckster Chapter 16, 38 Weeks. Anakin sighed in frustration as she gave up on sleep. The twins were obviously not ready to settle down for the night, and she wasn't going to sleep until they did. "You two are lucky I love you so much," she muttered as she pulled herself out of bed. R2-D2 beeped questioningly as he sensed Anakin's movement. She raised a finger to her lips and shushed him. "I'm just going for a walk, R2, she assured the droid. "Go back to sleep," R2 chirped after her, quietly reassured. Anakin wandered out into the still, quiet hallways of the temple. It seemed almost everyone was asleep. Anakin could sense a handful of temple guards, the silent sentinels keeping watch. A few people taking their shifts around the temple, but beyond that, the Force was quiet and soothing as the Jedi slept. Anakin would be glad when this hypersensitivity ended when the twins were born. Being in the temple was sometimes like standing in the midst of a massive crowd with everyone shouting at her. She enjoyed the slight reprieve she got when she was at the Senate. Even though there was far more senators than Jedi, their lack of Force sensitivity was easier on her, and stepping into Palpatine's office was like stepping into a deprivation chamber. It was certainly unnerving, but the calm was so soothing Anakin didn't want to think too hard about it, not yet at least. Anakin stopped in front of a large window and looked out into the city. She could see clear across the city to 500 Republica. She'd rather be there with Padme soothing her to sleep. Unfortunately, her husband was off planet and far out of reach. She'd be able to see Padme again tomorrow, though, and Anakin would just have to resign herself to waiting with the twins to settle down. She breathed deeply and closed her eyes, letting her thoughts wander. She sensed the younglings long before they were anywhere near her. She wasn't particularly concerned. It seemed every group of younglings managed to sneak their way out of bed and around the temple at least once. She could feel the brave ones boldly leading the group, the timid ones afraid of the dark or of being caught out of bed, and the ones whose pride wouldn't let them show their fear. It wasn't long before she heard them coming. They hadn't quite learned the art of subtlety. They rounded the corner and stopped dead, a shiver of fear moving through all of them. Anakin turned and smiled. "It's a little late to be out of bed, isn't it, young ones?" They all simultaneously sighed in relief. It was a well-known fact that Skywalker had always had a soft spot when it came to younglings. They approached her happily. Anakin saw they were quite young, only about 5 years old. "So what are you doing out of bed?" Anakin asked. "Exploring, Master Skywalker," a young Twi'lek boy explained. "And have you discovered anything interesting yet?" "Well, no." They all collectively stared down at their shuffling feet. "That's because it's easier to find things when the sun is up. Come on." Anakin placed her hands on the couple's shoulders and gently steered the younglings back the way they came. "I'll take you back to your creche." A couple of the younglings quietly expressed their disappointment, but they followed Anakin obediently. As they walked, a few fell behind and began discussing something in whispers. After a minute, it escalated and ended with one of them whispering a little too loudly, "You can't ask her that." "Do you have a question, young ones?" She stopped and turned back to face them. Anakin knew what they were talking about. At 9 months, the pregnancy was impossible to hide without her outer robe. Honestly, she was kind of surprised she hadn't been questioned by a curious youngling yet. "It's all right. Never be afraid to ask a question." The Twi'lek boy was pushed forward by his clan mates, sacrificed to sedate their curiosity. We were wondering why you look so different from the other human Jedi." Anakin smiled. "You're wondering why my belly is so big, right?" There was one muffled and quickly shushed a laugh from the younglings. It's all right, you can laugh. I know I look pretty ridiculous by now. Doesn't it mean you're going to have a baby? A Rhodian girl asked meekly. Yes, though in my case I'm actually having two. But I thought Jedi weren't allowed to have babies, a human girl commented. No, they're not, but I happen to be a special case, the one exception to the rule. Anakin hoped that would be enough to keep them happy for the rest of the walk. Why should she should have known better? Why? Well, because my babies are a special gift. Why? Anakin paused. She would have to lie to the younglings, but at the same time, they were far too young to hear the story she had given the council, and she didn't want to dismiss their questions either. She had just encouraged them to ask questions. Then she remembered the speculations of her own conception and figured that was a good enough half-truth. Well, you know about the midichlorians, right? Simultaneous nods. Sometimes the midichlorians can move themselves and use the force to create a baby. The younglings all gasped. Does that really happen? It only happened once in all of Jedi history. The younglings all looked at her in awe. Now come on, I need to get you back to bed. You don't want your creature master waking up to find you missing, do you? The younglings shuddered collectively at the thought of being caught out of bed by their caretaker and hurried after Anakin. Anakin marched them back, taking a shortcut through the room of 1,000 fountains. The awe-inspiring bioluminescent plants effectively banished any lingering questions they might have had for her. When they reached the younglings' dormitory, she held the door open, pretending to keep watch while the younglings snuck back into bed. Just as the last youngling scurried through the door, a tall figure approached down the hall. Anakin made eye contact with the relieved creation master. She held a finger to her lips as the chiss approached the door slowly and quietly. I think they're back in their beds now, she whispered after a moment. The chiss let loose a long-suffering sigh, scrubbing a hand across his face. Thank you, Skywalker. This is the fourth time they've gone out this week. I even changed the lock code. Anakin shrugged. Younglings will be younglings. That they will be. He gave Anakin an appreciative nod and slipped into the dormitory behind his younglings. As she returned to her own bed, Anakin wondered whether her own children would end up following the age-old tradition of younglings sneaking out of bed in a few years. Then, with a stab of pain, reality set back in, and a brief flash of a vision crossed her mind. Her children weren't going to live that long. Swearing and wiping away the tears that were quick to spring up, Anakin turned around. She'd never sleep after that. If she did, it would only bring nightmares. She'd wait out the rest of the night in the War Command Center. She'd be able to find some sort of distraction there. The command center was nearly empty, just a few droids performing maintenance and Mace Windu. The Jedi Master was standing at the large holotable watching a recording of a battle, his arms crossed, but in a generally relaxed stance. Trouble sleeping? I was outvoted, Anakin responded dryly, stepping up to the table. Mace raised an eyebrow at her and looked down at her stomach. He turned back to the hologram. You're due soon, aren't you? Just a couple more weeks. Anakin watched the battle intently. Where is this? My ghetto. Master Mundis is still out there, isn't he? Yes. He reports that they are finally gaining some ground on the Separatists. If all goes well, they can lay siege to the capital and drive out the Separatists soon. Anakin nodded silently. watching the battle. She didn't like being on this side of the war, safe and secure, while Jedi and clones rushed to face the enemy. It never sat right with her, and when reports came in that the 501st, she always felt guilty. She knew her guilt was misplaced. Nobody would blame her for taking up her position back at the temple, and even she wasn't reckless enough to put her children at risk by staying active in the war, but still. Her troopers didn't know why she had suddenly left. They'd been gone for over 5 months. All communications with them went through her substitute, a Republican general by the name of List, and he wasn't telling any stories. It had been decided that Anakin's pregnancy was going to be a well-kept secret for Jedi years only. It was a protective measure to keep the Separatists from finding out about her children. The odds were slim that the Separatists would bother asking where she had disappeared to, but just in case they did interrogate someone, a clone couldn't tell a secret he didn't know. Really, the only Separatists who could do real damage with that kind of information were Dooku and Grievous. The two had been unusually quiet as of late. It was concerning. Have there been any reports of Grievous or Dooku? Anakin asked, knowing there hadn't since the last war meeting earlier that afternoon. Nothing yet. Nobody's seen them for a few weeks now. They're planning something. Mace nodded grimly. Yes, something big. Something that will rock the Republic to its core. Anakin echoed Windu's grim nod. She could sense something was coming, something huge and threatening, but she couldn't sense anything beyond that, even with her hypersensitivity, and that concerned her even more. Whatever they were planning was thoroughly involved with the dark side. Unease sank into her bones and chilled her to the core. She just had to hope that she'd be around to help when whatever was coming happened. She was rapidly approaching a time when she would be forced to be out of commission. End of chapter.